and welcome to day 2 of the Sporting Chance Forum. I'm so excited about this morning. I'm so excited about the people that are here for this morning. Maud Debord-Bocchicchio is the UN Special Rapporteur on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography, a role she's held since 2014. She's also president of the European Federation for Missing and Exploited Children. Throughout her professional career, Maud has focused on children's human rights. Between 2002 and 2012, Maud served as the Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, the first woman ever elected to this post. Okay, that's amazing. In that capacity, she spearheaded 3 Council of Europe key conventions: the Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings, the Convention on the Protection of Children from Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse, and on the Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. So not only did you have a seat at the table, you got stuff done. I love that. In her capacity as the UN Special Rapporteur, she dedicated thematic reports to vulnerabilities of children to sale, trafficking, and other forms of exploitation in situations of conflict and communication technologies, ICT, illegal adoptions and commercial surrogacy, and the sale of children. And the reason why we have Maud here today, the Special Rapporteur, is that she's written a report that is, when we saw it, a pretty big deal, because it looks at the impact of all of this area that she's been working on through the lens of sport, and how sport plays directly, indirectly into whether or not children are safe. So I'd like to invite Maud up to give us some thoughts, and then we're going to have a panel. And I'd like to also, at that point, introduce our moderator, who we're very excited to have. But I will do that after the Special Rapporteur offers her opening remarks. Is that okay, Dorothy? Or do you want me to bring them all up at once? Bring them all up? Okay, let's bring everybody up. My apologies. Let's bring, okay, Maud, if you can come up. Najat. Dorothy, so let's have everybody up. Catherine, Leslie, Iris, Belen. Muchas gracias, Belen. Yes, let's go up and take the stage. I think Maud kicks off, right? Or do you kick off? Oh, you're going to kick off. Okay. Okay. So I'd also like to introduce Najat Mala Majid. She is the UN Special Representative, so the most senior UN official dedicated to the safety of children. And we are so honored to have you here. Thank you very much for being at the Sporting Chance Forum. The floor is yours, Najat.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Buenos dias. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Before I moderate this panel, I would like to start with a video done by a powerful and short video done by Council of Europe, Start to Talk.
First, I was one of the only girls on the team. They started making fun of my body because it's a swimsuit, so everything's visible. Later on, that turned into like hugging. Their arms they traveled to weird locations. But I didn't want to say anything. They're just gonna say they're making jokes.
I feel kind of strange when she comes near me. It feels as if I'm being treated differently. It's a very strange feeling I cannot describe. I really get butterflies in my stomach. It feels very weird. I want to tell her not to do it, but telling an adult to not do something is very mean.
I have a coach, which I really admire. He won loads of medals, and I really wish I could further my career with him. It's just in some ways not. He touched me in places. He forced me to do more uncomfortable things. I can't talk about it much. I'm scared. I'm scared of what they will think.
We can applaud them because it was first, I want to really warmly thank the organizer making me participating in this event. And for me, it's more than an event. It's really a key milestone as we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Convention on Child Rights, and also because as Special Representative on Violence Against Children, and I start only on past July, and you know that the mandate is a kind of global advocate in preventing and eliminating all forms of violence against children in all settings, including sports. And also this mandate has a big role really to accelerate and to advocate for the implementation of SDGs, and mainly SDG 16.2 and all the other SDGs that are related to children and other forms of violence. And as you know, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a crucial framework for our discussion. When the General Assembly adopted the 2030 Agenda, it recognized sport as an important enabler for sustainable development. Member States highlighted the growing contribution of sport through its promotion of tolerance and respect, as well as its importance to achieving SDG targets on health, education, and social inclusion. Sport is equally important to the realization of many rights set out in the CRC, including the right to rest, play, and recreation, the right to the highest attainable standard of health, and the right to education. But despite the overwhelmingly positive role of sport in children's life, we know that it can also be associated with physical, sexual, and emotional abuse and exploitation. Abuse and exploitation in sport can take many forms. It can involve both elite athletes and regular sporting clubs in school and communities. It can involve abuse within the circle of trust and exploitation by traffickers, offenders. It can involve also offenders operating in local communities and offenders who travel. We also know that the response to the abuse and exploitation of children in sport has not been good enough so far. While responsibility for these crimes lies primarily with offenders, we cannot forget the institutional failures that have left children at risk. This includes the failure on the part of some sporting organizations to build a robust culture of safeguarding. It also includes the failure of states to create a legal and policy environment that prioritizes prevention, that provides safe and accessible reporting mechanisms, and that ensures accountability and redress. But there have been important developments since the last Sporting Chance Forum. On the normative level, the recently adopted guidelines on the optional protocol to CRC on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography explicitly address sports as an area where parties to the optional protocol must take action. Just 2 months ago, the UN World Tourism Organization also adopted the Framework Convention on Tourism Ethics, which has specific provisions on protecting children from violence. The Framework Convention will be an important tool to accelerate on violence against children in the context of travel and tourism, including for mega sporting events. On the practical level, we have seen more sporting organizations put in place policies, procedures, and programs to raise safeguarding standards. And of course, another key development is the publication of the Special Rapporteur's thematic report on this topic, which we are discussing today. The recommendations set out in the report provide a broad and ambitious agenda, but it is doable and within reach. In this session, the Special Rapporteur will present her report and the recommendations directed at the different stakeholders with a role to play in this field. This will set the scene for the discussion that will follow on how to translate the recommendation into action and how to monitor their implementation effectively. And most importantly, we will hear from children and youth themselves on what steps should be taken to involve them meaningfully in implementing the recommendation of the report and to ensure that children everywhere can be empowered to act as agents of change to end violence against children in sport. And I give the floor to Maud.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this impressive hall. I'm very pleased to be here with you today, and I'm particularly grateful to the organizers and to Mary for having initiated this event, her colleagues, in particular Dorothy, and the other team members for having made this happen. A session dedicated exclusively to children's rights is something very important, even if I'm also very pleased that the word children is being mentioned in many, many other sessions. It's not just here and now, it's all over the forum. So I think this is something we should be very happy about. I also wanted to thank Najat for having made it to Geneva in her very busy schedule, but I know how much importance she attaches to every form of violence against children, and the forms of violence which we will be discussing about, the form of sexual abuse and exploitation and sale of children in the context of sports, is a particular form of violence, which she will undoubtedly be able to address also in her capacity as Special Representative of the Secretary General, and her support is absolutely crucial. So thank you for being here, Najat. Well, I could go on thanking everybody else, but I think we need to get into the substance. Once again, I want to say we're here together, so I will call you dear team players. So dear team players, many, if not all of us in the room, indeed are in one way or another connected with sports. We practice it as leisure or as professionals, and it makes us good if we perform well. Physical challenges, if met, and team spirit, when practiced, come with reward. It will benefit our body and our soul, and it will make us stronger in many respects. This is especially true for children everywhere in the world. Yesterday in New York, during the UN General Assembly celebrations of the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we heard Yanné, an 11-year-old boy, young boy, affected by spinal muscular atrophy, answer a question by Jordi Cardoner, who's the chairman of FC Barcelona and president of the Barca Foundation. The question was, what skills have you learned from football that have had a positive impact on your life? And his answer was leadership, passion, and team play. Nobody could have said it better than he did. So, dear friends, it's true that overall sports conveys a very positive image, and yet it has its dark side, especially when it comes to children. In sport at all levels, children have a right to play safely. To play, it's in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and to play safely and secure. But for some children, the reality is quite different. sale and sexual exploitation of children occurs in all parts and settings of society around the world, and sports is no exception. The power dynamics inherent to the sporting world render children particularly vulnerable to abuse and exploitation and make the reporting of these situations very difficult. In the report, to which Mary referred to a moment ago, and which I presented to the Human Rights Council in March this year, and actually an easier readable version is available in this room, because sometimes perhaps it's too much of a UN language, so Dorothy is showing it, it's there. I had a closer look at situations in which children practicing sports fall into traps and experience abuse and exploitation. Let me start with the concept of sale, prohibited per Article 35 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and, you know, the most universally ratified legal instrument in the world, and also by the optional protocol, a bit less, not universally ratified, but close to 170 countries in the world have ratified it. The sale of child athletes from competitive training and competitive training and ultimately profit amounts to a form of sale of children for the purpose of forced labor. It generally features an imbalance of power in which financial power is used to draw children and their families who are in economic hardship into unfair practices over which they have no control. Recruiters may then treat child athletes as commodities with no rights, whose value depends on their capacity to work and from which they expect to make a rapid profit. Children are often transferred from one country to another and find themselves in an unknown setting with an uncertain legal status which binds them to their employer. They may be traded from club to club and forced to train intensively under the threat of finding themselves undocumented, having their dreams crushed, and with no resources. Reports have emerged of children being recruited in developing countries and sold to play in basketball or soccer teams. Behind such recruitment, there is a system involving coaches, recruitment agencies, individual recruiters, and high-level financial transactions, with some children being kept in poor living conditions, ending up in very difficult situations if they do not succeed in securing placement in a team and having to pay huge fees to their coaches. The absence of a clear contractual relationship, disregard of regulations regarding transfer of minors, mechanisms of third-party ownership, and/or trafficking of children are all indicative of children being treated as commodities and commercial assets exposed to exploitation. Third-party ownership has been banned in football and soccer. However, despite the good work of many sporting organizations, the practice continues, and again, exploitation is a likely outcome. Young talents enrolled in football academies frequently face abuses with arduous schedules and little or no say in their career choices. Children recruited in these academies are considered to be commodities and venture capital. Even if transferred to big clubs, once they turn 18, they will generally be immediately loaned out to smaller clubs or third-party owner schemes with no say on their destinies, in direct violation of the FIFA ban. Dear friends, the second area which I addressed in the report is that of sexual abuse and exploitation of children in the context of sports. And I just wanted to pay tribute to the wonderful video we just saw, which has been made by the Council of Europe under the leadership and inspiration of Elda Moreno, who is with us today. And she will be with you in the afternoon for a session in which she will further explain the Council of Europe work. But I think it sets the tone and the atmosphere and the issues which are complex and delicate, but frightening, and we have to address them. Every day news stories emerge about the sexual abuse and exploitation of young people in the very place they should have no fear, their playing fields, their gymnasium, their swimming pools, their locker room. Abusers are their coaches, their team doctors, trainers, and others who are in contact with them, the very persons they trust most. The abuse spans the full spectrum of sports and has no gender or geographic boundaries. What makes children particularly vulnerable is the frequently unvetted access to them of adults with perverse intentions. Screening mechanisms, if in place, are often inadequately implemented. At-risk situations are at times created if children are not in their familiar environment, like trips away or alone in the cars of a coach, and reporting conditions are far too often not met. Children are afraid to report for reasons of fear and shame and stigma. So what needs to be done? Increased awareness of these practices at the level of governments, sport federations, and civil society should provide a beginning of a response. And this forum is an excellent platform to confirm that awareness. There's an international legal framework which sets very clear obligations for states and responsibilities for private actors as well, such as sports organizations, to deal and to address these human rights violations. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the optional protocol which I just mentioned, international statutes pertaining to trafficking, organized crime, and tourism ethics. Actually, the latter dimension has recently been enhanced by the adoption of the UN World Tourism Organization Framework Convention on Tourism Ethics. And this convention adds to the existing body of international law devoted to tackling this very grave problem. It provides that tourism activities should promote the rights of the child. Very clear. And the Framework Convention also requests state parties to combat and penalize the exploitation of children, especially sexual exploitation. We just heard from Najat that there are also now new guidelines which have been adopted recently and supported by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which provides further clarification on the implications of the obligations under the optional protocol with particular reference to sport. So that should also help the understanding of legal texts, which may be sometimes subject to discussion. These guidelines are very clear and straightforward. But, you know, these texts are there, explanations in paper, but we need to implement them. And the challenge lies there. The challenge lies with the implementation of these obligations and responsibilities to ensure that the best interest of the child serve as a fundamental principle throughout the practice of sport. The guiding principles on business and human rights, dating back to 2011, are highly important. They have 3 pillars, and they include corporate responsibility and access to remedy, and that should be the authoritative benchmark for states and sport organizations. So, as you see, there's a plethora of safeguards, standards, regulations, policies, and code of conducts dealing with the rights of the child in the context of sports. But different approaches are followed, and there is no standard use of terminology, which leads to inconsistencies, and that may weaken protection, and hence the importance of the guidelines to which I refer once more. In my report regarding prevention and remedy efforts, I have emphasized the need for independent reporting mechanisms within sports organizations and the implementation of reporting obligations in close coordination with existing national child protection frameworks. I want to insist on the crucial role of background checks for anyone working with children. In the context of major sporting events, there are numerous human rights violations affecting children, also those living in the neighborhood of the stadia, forced displacement, sexual exploitation, and child labor, impacting the right to education and adequate housing. It is therefore crucial to systematically include human rights due diligence criterion in bids for these events. In my report, I have also underlined the importance of ensuring that the practice of sports, in particular at the elite level, does not amount to child labor. In this respect, the right to education is fundamental, and appropriate measures must be taken to guarantee balanced tuition that does not sacrifice the learning of other skills beyond proficiency in sports. Dear friends, let me hasten to add that everything I have said in my report and here today applies to all child athletes, not only those at the elite level. Since finalizing my report, I have heard too often, this doesn't concern us, in particular from parents and coaches at community level. But my answer is, my findings and recommendations apply at all levels. Even children in amateur, community level sporting activities can be abused, harassed, overtrained and bullied. And last but not least, in order to integrate children's best interest in the practice of sport, it is important to ensure avenues for meaningful participation. There is so much we can learn from them, as we are seeing during this forum. So, dear team players, let's work on all this together. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives. Thank you.
You hear me? Many thanks, Maud. Let me introduce you the panel. And we have in this panel sports organization, state representative, ILO, and also youth representative of Youth Organization Network. And just if I start by from the sporting organization, we have Iris Hugo Bouvier from UFA, Football and Social Responsibility Coordinator. We are waiting for David Gravenberg, Chief Executive of Commonwealth Games. Catherine Leslie from FIFA, she's Senior Child Safeguarding and Protection Manager. We have from Spain, Belén Lara Martinez, Head of Cooperation and Promotion Services, High Council for Sport. We have from ILO, Tiago Curjao Alves Ribeiro, who is in charge of the Division of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work Branch. And we have Shafina, who is there, she is representing the Youth Organization Network. What we are going to hear from this wonderful panel, and very representative panel, we want to hear from you your perspective on the challenge and the opportunities of implementing the recommendation made by Maud, and also to hear from you if you have good or practical examples on how sports organizations and governments are taking action to protect children in the sports environment. And to start, I will give the floor for 5 minutes to Iris Hugo Bouvier, please.
Thank you, Naja. My name is Iris. I'm working at the European Football Association. We are situated in Nyon, here in Switzerland. Why am I here? Why football? Well, what happened in 2016 was that there were big scandals in the UK about boys being abused by coaches for 15 years. Our president then stated at the UEFA Congress in 2017 that this cannot be. We have to keep our children safe. We then did an assessment with our national associations. We have 55 member associations all over Europe to find out what we can do on our side and what are the needs on behalf of our members. The consultancy was very extensive, and I can tell you it was not easy to start with, because when you start with a project like this, you don't know where to start. There are terminologies which are different from one organization to the other, from one country to the other. What does it mean when you speak about abuse? What does it mean when you speak about harm? What does somebody say when it's sexual abuse? In France, there's a law which gives consent to have sexual reports with minors who are 12. This is all disgusting for me. I'm sorry, this is my personal opinion, but I'm very touched by this issue, and I'm passionate, and I'm very glad that I can work on that. After the consultancy, we also have, with the support of, we also had meetings and invited FIFA and the Council of Europe. The head of rights and children's rights and sports values is here. We consulted cross-divisionally within UEFA, and the process is very long. We assess the situation, and we have the commitment from our president, and now we want to embed it in throughout the organization, because there is no use to have someone to do it, but not all of us, because you cannot look away. If you see, it's easy to give responsibility to each and to one person, but what happens if this is not the person who sees something? What happens if the person who sees it doesn't know to whom to speak to? What happens if the child doesn't know to whom to speak to? That cannot be, so everybody is responsible. And how often do I see it in the streets, even here in Switzerland, how parents are speaking to their parents, and how children are abused on the football pitch by parents, by coaches, and nobody's speaking up. This cannot be. With our leadership and in our leadership, we have developed policy which will go to the UEFA Executive Committee in December. It is to prevent abuse. We have developed, together with our partner Terrorism in Lausanne, who is also present here, thank you very much, a safeguarding toolkit which will be a guidance for our member associations, giving the framework of recommendation, minimum recommendations, what can be done. Of those, and we will do induction and training for our member associations to see where they need support and what we can do to embed the project. Our HETRIC program at UEFA is giving financial incentives so that every national association who is doing something can also be supported on that level, maybe higher resources if necessary. The aim is to have a framework to guide towards a quality safeguarding management all over our national associations. And our goal is to have minimum requirements because we want a consistent child safeguarding approach to ensure that football is a safe, positive, and enjoyable experience for children and young people at every level of the organization. I'm sorry, I'm new in the project. We are starting with it. I hope it's overwhelming because when you start with such a project, you get so many inputs. There's so many organizations, and we are very thankful for everybody. We are thankful for FIFA. We are thankful for the Council of Europe. As an European organization, we have to work closely with the Council of Europe. We have a memorandum of understanding with the European Commission and the Council of Europe regarding child rights. Everything else has been mentioned before. What I want to repeat, what is important for us is be alert and watch out for behaviors and situations that could affect the safety and well-being of all children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you. Thank you so much. It works. Thank you so much. I give now the floor to Catherine Leslie from FIFA, please.
Is this working? Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Najad, and thanks to Maud for her report. It's always very helpful to have a global report of this kind that's backed up by data and research. It helps us to move the conversation forward, and of course it builds on the IOC consensus statement on this topic that was issued a few years ago. I'd like to also thank and acknowledge the survivors who are in the room, because without their bravery for coming forward, none of us would be here, and especially those who spoke at the forum last year, their bravery and their experience is why we're all sitting here, so thank you. From FIFA's side, I'm happy to give an overview of what we have been doing and the journey that we have started, as well as address some of the issues that came up yesterday, and to speak to some of the challenges in implementation. For FIFA, in July of this year, we launched our Child Safeguarding Programme and Toolkit. And as Iris mentioned, the toolkit is essentially a framework or a handbook to guide the 211 member associations around the world on how to put in place a long-term system of safeguarding. It's based on 5 principles and 5 steps that they need to put in place to keep children safe from harm. The 5 steps are based on the international safeguards for children in sport, and that's looking at a range of measures from, first and foremost, thinking about all the ways that children are playing football in your country and how they are involved in the sport, to map out who an association's local partners and expert agencies are, to assess what measures they currently have or do not have in place, as well as how to develop and design a child safeguarding policy and what does that look like, what does it mean for the association, what does it say. It also sets out measures on how to develop procedures to implement your policy, including, for example, having a clear code of conduct that spells out what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour towards children in football. It also sets out clear, safe recruitment measures and guidance on thinking about who those people are that interact with children on a daily basis in football and what safe recruitment and practices mean, including the training and education that needs to be provided to those people who work with children. It also sets out very clearly what to do should cases or concerns arise, and I'll speak a little bit about that in a few moments, and it speaks to some of the recommendations that are in the report of the Special Rapporteur. A key approach that we're taking to the programme, and it speaks also to one of the challenges, is the sheer amount of capacity building that's needed to help support the national associations to put in place safeguarding measures. And we will be looking at developing a number of training and education packages and programmes to build the capacity of the national associations to keep kids safe in football, but also to respond appropriately if and when concerns do arise. And as you said, if concerns do arise, there has to be a framework in place to appropriately respond by working with and through national child protection frameworks. Of course, in many parts of the world, those frameworks are either very weak or non-existent. And this is one of the challenges that's faced by a lot of associations on what to do if a case or concern arises. So our message to them is clear that you have to work with local agencies and experts on the ground that can help. And in many cases, that may not be local child protection services because they're just not available. So this is a continued challenge that I think and not just in football, a number of sports organisations face around the world. A couple of other measures that have recently been introduced by FIFA. Firstly, to say that within the FIFA Forward programme, this is FIFA's main football development programme, whereby money and revenues that are raised through the World Cup go back out to the 211 member associations via the FIFA Forward programme to help develop football around the world. And one of the obligations within that programme is that associations need to have safeguarding measures in place. And we're currently looking at how that gets embedded through all projects and programmes and how we can support implementation on that. Another recent measure that was introduced, and it speaks to the point that Oluwale made yesterday and to the points that you raised in your report about the problem of child trafficking in football. The FIFA Council recently adopted and approved new measures for the reintroduction of mandatory licensing for all intermediaries and agents, as well as continuous professional development for those agents. And we will be looking with the Football Stakeholders Committee and the regulatory arm of FIFA of what the actual licensing requirements are and what training they will need to go to promote the best interests of children. To speak to some of the challenges and opportunities, like I said, one of the key challenges is to support and build capacity of national associations, as well as their clubs and leagues who directly work with children. And I think, again, this is an area where all sports organisations are facing a struggle, but I think a key opportunity that we have at the moment is that this is a topic that's very high, not just on a lot of sports organisations' agendas, but it's also high on governments' agendas. And that helps to keep the conversation moving and to keep the agenda moving forward. And for us, it's really important that we work together with our partners, many of whom are in the room today, with other sports organisations to develop core training and education materials to help raise awareness, build capacity and support those who are working directly with kids on a daily basis to keep them safe. So these are some of the measures that we've started to look at. It's very much a journey for FIFA in as much as it is for a lot of the associations. Some of them have very good policies, procedures, training programmes in place, and they started a long time ago. they are, a lot of them within Iris's region in Europe, but of course in North America and Australia too. But I can say we haven't yet conducted a survey, but I think I can almost safely say that maybe 80 to 90% of associations around the world, this is a very new topic for them, and we need to provide them with the support, and we need to work with governments at national level. They need to work with governments and partners at national level to promote safeguarding, to do safeguarding, and have it embedded in their football governance and in all programs and activities. And we will be looking at also in the future at how FIFA can also have safeguarding measures in place, especially in our competitions that we run on a yearly basis. And there's a lot of competitions, not just the Men and Women's World Cup, but the under-17s, under-19s. And we're currently in the process of looking, as Andrea said yesterday, of what a competition time safeguarding framework can also look like for us. So these are some of the measures and challenges that we're facing.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. And I think that David Gravenberg found his way, and I call him to... okay, wonderful. From Commonwealth Games.
I leave my chair.
You can take my chair. No, I want to stay. It's okay.
I'm late.
Okay.
It's like musical chairs. Thank you very much. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that as the difference between, say, a FIFA and the Commonwealth Games Federation is that we are a multi-sport event, and that our primary focus has been, and that's slightly shifting, and I'll talk to how we're embedding both child rights as well as child safeguarding in our strategic priorities. But we have historically been every 4 years. So our focus has been fairly myopic in asserting our relevance and our presence and our sense of jurisdiction and responsibility to that limited space. What we've realized over the past several years is that our responsibility is much, much further involved. If we're truly going to call ourselves a movement and be a part of a global sporting movement, we need to contribute. And first and foremost, obviously, child rights and child safe, which embeds child safeguarding, is something that is critical. I think if I start, firstly, I think we'd like to say that on behalf of the Commonwealth Games Federation, we fully support the recommendations that have been put forward by the rapporteur. And I think that is, it's a fantastic guiding document that really legitimizes the conversation in so many ways. When we start to work with national governing bodies, when we start to work with cities, we start to work with hosts to say that this is not just us preaching to you and being trendy, but this is actually something that is really important, relevant, and critical to the legitimacy and relevance of the power of sport. The Commonwealth Games has gone over, I think, a fairly swift transition. About 5 years ago, when we finished Glasgow 2014, and we did probably a landmark commitment to children during those games. We partnered with UNICEF, and Liz Twyford here has been one of our great partners, champions, and people that has really educated me a lot as a sports leader on the importance of the child's voice in this process. And by empowering children, educating children on their rights, it gives children the chance to not have safeguarding done to them, that they are actually safeguarding themselves and protecting themselves. And so creating a culture of sport that empowers children, gives children that voice, and has the necessary mechanisms and policies. And this is about people, not just policies. Policies help people in these situations. That was a real, I would say, a seismic paradigm shift for us in terms of upholding, first, the safeguarding, no harm environment, then ensuring that children understand their rights. And so in the lead up to Glasgow, one of the projects we ran with all of the schools across Glasgow, and now, dare I say, is that all of the schools across Scotland are now UNICEF recognized schools that have been taught, and this is a direct result of the games, been taught the rights of children in terms of the convention. And so that is something that was certainly we used as a catalyst. But first and foremost, we needed to put mechanisms. If we were truly going to empower children, embrace children as part of whether it was our design competitions for the mascots or whether it was actually doing events with children, during our events and the big event, we had to have measures in place. We had to have appropriate vetting procedures. We had to have all of these elements. The one area that I think we can do better in is remedy. And that and understanding and giving children the ability and giving people the ability to feed in, call out, and have systems and mechanisms during the games and beyond that allow people to protect themselves and call for help when necessary. There's a lot of inconsistency around that. Now, we've also, so since Glasgow, the movement has seen this as a priority. I would say we were probably a bit clunky going into Glasgow 2014, but it was a huge priority. And we put children first in an appeal that we did during our opening ceremonies and raised awareness and raised ultimately £6.5 million for children during the opening ceremony. So the commitment certainly was there. And since then, in the lead up to our youth games the very next year in Samoa, so we took 1,000 children from 64 countries participating in 9 sports, all the way to Samoa from across the Commonwealth. Now, Samoa's legislation at the time and their event strategy, this was the biggest event to have come to the country. There is working, again, with partners, both in government, civil society, with UNICEF as well. We had the ability to actually change and write legislation. And now with, I think, the recommendations that are being put forward, it actually starts to give us a guideline. We did what we felt was best practice. But what this really allows us to do is to make something that will be contextually relevant and, again, leave a lasting legacy. So essentially Samoa and then in 2017 Bahamas both took the clunkiness of what we created around the games and have embedded that in their legislation. And that has been something that, the potential, now whether it is pristine and perfect, that is to be seen, but I think the recommendations that have come forward now give us a chance to go back to that and start to work with that and make it I think something very meaningful. Similar to FIFA, we are cascading this responsibility and again, working with international and national partners to ensure that everyone doesn't see this as risk management, but just the nature and responsibility of our movement. And that is something that comes down to the language that we use, the emphasis that we place on it, and I would say a constant reminder that this is something that if we fail this, if we fail our duty of care, and I mentioned this yesterday in our opening remarks, we fail before we've even started. So that's the quick intervention, and again, apologies to all the delegates for my tardiness. Thank you.
No, think my please.
You sure?
Because you are going to answer to the question.
I will now give the floor to Madame Belén Lara Martínez.
Bueno, buenos días.
Good morning. At the outset, allow me to thank the organization Center for Sport and Human Rights for inviting us to take part. I'd like to thank the organization, especially Dorothy, for a number of reasons. First of all, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first time that a panelist is taking the floor in Spanish. And for us, of course, this matters. And it's important because Spanish is the second most spoken language, but it is also important because we who humbly take the floor here are better able to communicate fluidly as a consequence. It's very important because it gives voice and importance to the Latin American region, which we feel is an essential thing. It is essential to work jointly with Latin America and forums such as this one. And I am here because a very enthusiastic person called Dorothy was generous enough to share with us in Guatemala back in October the first Ibero-American seminar on the protection of children and adolescents in sport. Now, I don't really need to tell you about Dorothy because you know her better than I do, but she traveled 16,000 kilometers from Bangkok to Antigua to share her views and advice with us, to provide guidance to us. And this crazy enthusiast was accompanied by Eda Morena, who is here as well, and she has helped us greatly with all our initiatives, both in Spain and in Iberoamerica. She was the driving force along with Dorothy, and that is why I'm here today, really. I am not an expert, I'm a novice, and I am inspired by this forum because we are making progress, and I would like to share with you some of the best practices that we are putting in place within the High Council for Sport of Spain, and I will try to tell you what I can about it. Now, Nadia is monitoring me, and I promised that I would stick to the 5 minutes allotted to me, although I feel I need 50 really, but I will try to make do. In the Ibero-American seminar, which took place in the framework of the Ibero-American Council for Sport, which is an intergovernmental organization comprising 22 countries from the Latin American region. I'm not going to go into all of the details because our Secretary of State, Maria José Rienda, will speak later about all that is being done in the region. But just to provide you with a bit of background, this seminar was part of a very ambitious program that we are working on with the region in terms of achieving Agenda 2030 and implementing the Kansan plan and achieving the SDGs, and in particular, Goal 16.2, which is relevant to us. The High Council for Sport is a governmental organization in charge of sport at the national level in Spain. Now, our geographical and political reality is such that competencies are decentralized at local and regional level. So without going into the technical details, this means that many of the skills that are developed and the competencies that lie in the field of children and youth are held by local councils and regional councils. And when you talk about the protection of children in sports, there are many sports organizations that are involved in this task. Picking up on what Maud said, as a government representative, albeit in a technical capacity, I can say that much has been done in terms of the legislative framework, and following the first white paper on sport from the European Union and all the way up to the work programs that we have been carrying out under the aegis of the EU, from the protection of minors in the field of sport to other more specific issues. This has always been a priority for us, and today I am equally glad to share with you the fact that yesterday, in the context of a ministerial meeting that took place in Brussels, under the chairmanship of Finland, the first normative document was adopted containing conclusions dedicated to mechanisms for protecting and safeguarding children and teenagers in the context of sport. So along the lines of what Maud was saying, we do need to work fast, but we are making progress. We have a number of inputs to provide in the context of bills, including one on childhood. Now, as you know, we're at a bit of a deadlock right now. There have been recent elections in Spain, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen. But for the first time, we're going to have a specific section on measures for protecting children and teenagers in the field of sport and leisure activities. We also have a series of protocols and procedures, and in addition to this, for the first time, we will have a delegate on prevention. As a government entity, this is a major step forward for us. I'd also like to tell you that given this distribution of competencies, we have to be very cautious when it comes to drawing up procedures and protocols, because very often we do not hold formal competency in order to implement it. As a government, we are working with partnerships. We work with various fields. In the public sector, we work with administrations, and we also work with the private sector, NGOs, and, of course, federations.
As far as we're concerned, national federation in the area of sport are private entities, but they do perform public duties, so all the protocols that we're working with them on are very positive. I know I'm running out of time, but I'd just like to say that through our partnerships, we've managed to draw up a number of handbooks, such as this one that we drew up with UNICEF, the Spanish committee. I think they're very important for providing safe and protective spaces for children and youth. They're written in English as well. They can be downloaded from the website of the Sports Governing Council. I would also like to add in the last 15 seconds that the Spanish Sports Governing Council, together with counterparts in France and Luxembourg, have been working on a European project under the aegis of the Erasmus Plus Sport programme. Elder and a number of others here have been working on this. We're very proud of this. It will lead to materials and protocols which underscore the need for training and empowerment of children, but above all, it will work on children's environment. It'll be accessible for you because we'll have French, Spanish, Italian, English language versions, and it'll be ready in June of next year. I hope not to have overstepped my time too much. Thank you very much for listening.
I give the floor to Thiago from ILO.
Hello, good morning. I'd like to thank the organization for the invitation to be here on this very special event. It's a pleasure. And first of all, I'd like to say about the importance of the recommendations of the Special Rapporteur, a very important roadmap when it comes to the protection of child's rights in the context of sports, and I'll come back to them. But at first, I'd like to, from the perspective of ILO, I'd like to highlight the importance of the labor dimension of the protection of child's rights in the context of sports. We might have, for example, young athletes that are receiving some kind of training in order to become professionals, and they might be exposed to hazardous conditions, they might be exposed to risks of harassment, and they should deserve the protection of the international labor standards. And apart from these children directly involved in the context of sports, we also have the risks associated and created and related to, for example, the production of sports material and equipment. We might have a risk of child labor, exploitation, and many value chains related to sports. And ILO is addressing this issue in partnership with many stakeholders around the world, but there's still a lot to do. For example, a recent report published by ILO and other partners showed that the exporting industry with the highest level of risk of exploitation of child labor in Central and Southern Asia was textile industry. So that's definitely something that should be taken into account by sports organizations when it comes to procurement. So children directly involved in the context of sports, or these children that might be exposed to some risk related to value chains, they should all deserve the protection of international labor standards. And I can mention, for example, the importance of the Convention 182 about the worst forms of child labor that's almost universally ratified, the importance of the Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, and the importance of the recent Convention about Violence and Harassment that hopefully will be ratified soon by many countries, but can already be used as a guideline, has been just approved this year in the Centenary Conference of ILO. So these are all standards that should be considered by all stakeholders involved in the world of sports. And apart from this perspective of ILO, I come from Brazil, and I'm originally a labor prosecutor of the Labor Prosecution Office of Brazil, and it's not possible not to mention, with this background, the recent tragedy that many of you might remember, when 10 children in Rio de Janeiro, they died in a fire in the training center in a soccer school of Flamengo. It was a tragedy that definitely we should take it into account and learn some lessons from it. According to the investigations, that happened because the fire was actually in the lodging, and the children were exposed to a lot of hazardous conditions, to risks of fire, and that definitely should take us to take action for prevention and for not allowing that something like that can happen again. And that makes us think also that the protection of children's rights can really, save children's life. And finally, coming back to the recommendations, we have, these lessons learned from Brazil, and that's sad to talk about them, but it's important. But I can also bring some good practice and good examples from Brazil. I take the example of the recommendation on implementation of reporting mechanisms and providing training for professionals. And in Brazil, the Labor Prosecution Office and some national federations like the Swimming Federation and Gymnastics Federation, they settled some agreements, some partnerships in order to, first of all, implementation of reporting mechanisms in these sports in which we had some cases at national and international level of harassment, and also for providing training for professionals that are under the authority of these federations. That's an example of how implementing this in practice, an example of collective actions of organizations that, like the prosecution office, would care, which we should think that they would care only about the law enforcement, but they are all these organizations are engaged in collective action to do more, and that's definitely what we should do when it comes to protect children rights in the context of sports. Thank you.
Thank you, Thiago. I give the floor to Shafina, who will speak on behalf of youth organization.
My name is Shafina Kaki with the Center for Sport and Human Rights. On behalf of the European Non-Governmental Sport Organization, I would like to present a statement from the Youth Network. I quote, "This has always been a sensitive topic to talk about, and the recommendations stated in the report are giving a way to not only talk about it, but to move a step forward and actually start changing the situation. This is extremely important in the sports sector, as for a long time, the understanding of the abuse was and sometimes still is unclear. It is our collective responsibility to remove this fear. Based on our experience with our Voice project, we believe the follow-up on the recommendations should ensure that prevention programs raise awareness on how to prevent child right violations in sport. As a second step, young people around Europe believe states should be able to provide rehabilitation and recovery services for the victims, not just in the capital cities where the system is already working or under improvement process. The biggest challenge is in the small cities where there are not enough teachers, psychologists, or other specialists qualified to ensure recovery programs. There is no small or high abuse. They are all very personal and might have an effect for the rest of their life. At the end of the day, the most important factor in implementing the recommendations is willingness. Change is coming. It is only possible with awareness raising, and we would like to congratulate everyone here for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shafina. Thank you, all of you. And I will open the floor to discussion for 10 minutes. Yes, please.
Danse, and thank you, Your Excellency, Special Rapporteur, and all the panel members for your outstanding contribution and recommendations for this very important and timely topic. In pursuit of playing it safe and the sporting chance principles, in particular principles 1 to 9, our delegation would draw your attention to the rights-based approach that we have been using for several years to deal with promotion of health and prevention of traumatic and historic abuse. First, however, we would prefer to be identified as indigenous peoples rather than marginalized groups. We are rights-bearing holders, and in that regard, we would request when the Center for Sport and Human Rights considers human rights, you should consider, among three things, that the majority of indigenous peoples are indeed children and youth. First, at our first intervention on the consideration of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Committee's Special Day on Indigenous Children, it was highlighted during the discussion on the role of sports that the North American Indigenous Games, the World Indigenous Games, actually have a policy of zero tolerance. Secondly, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, preambular paragraph in Article 31, which specifically includes traditional games and sports as part of our cultural manifestation, includes promotion of peace, healing, and advancing reconciliation. Thirdly, when states report on their compliance to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, General Comment number 11 of the Convention states, and I quote, "With reference to Article 31 of the Convention, the Committee notes the many positive benefits of participation in sports, traditional games, physical education, and recreational activities, and calls on states parties to ensure that Indigenous children enjoy the effective exercise of these rights. Finally, we respectfully request, when the Special Rapporteur's recommendations to sporting organizations and states are being implemented, that the above stated, among other human rights of indigenous children, are included. Hi, thank you very much.
There is some other questions? Could you please introduce you in the beginning?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning. My name is Ann Lieberman. Oh, is this on? Yeah. Good morning. My name is Ann Lieberman, and I'm with Athlete Ally. So my question is a timely one, given the past comment, but I'm interested to learn from the panel, how have you addressed the way in which LGBTQI plus youth, youth of color, indigenous youth, youth with disabilities often experience higher rates of violence or harm within sport?
There is another question?
Thank you very much, Program Director. So my name is Commissioner Amir Mia from the Human Rights Commission again. I just want to make a comment on the report of the UN Special Rapporteur on the sale and sexual exploitation of children. And one thing I noticed that we should perhaps, going forward from this engagement, on the very last page of the report on page 18, in the concluding remarks, it should be specifically stated that nobody can contract out of the Bill of Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as such. And perhaps this last resolution should read that the independence and autonomy of sporting institutions are key principles. They must be consistent with the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then it says, but they should not blur responsibility in the sports sector. They need to coexist alongside the safety and security of the child athletes. So it has to be consistent with the Convention of the Rights of the Children, as you mentioned, but it must be underpinned by the principles of the Universal Declaration of Rights and the articles that are pertinent to the rights of the child, per se. Thank you very much.
No more question? Okay, but I have also some questions, and I want you to take them into account. I just want really to all of you what it's important. We heard a lot about what is going on. We have many commitments at national, global level, at national level, from states. We have some key tools, procedures that are really currently being established by sports organizations. My main question really, it will be how we can move today and not to have a kind of, we can pledge and to make it more concrete at national level, to make sure what could be the practical steps that sports organizations, not only at global level, with the support and in close partnership with all the other key stakeholders, are going really to build a kind of sport that is providing and enabling, empowering, really protecting and advocating for children. The floor is to you. Who was going to start?
Maybe I could. Is it working? Maybe I can say by starting with one of the principles of the forum this year about collective action. And especially when it comes to national level, I think working with multi-stakeholder groups is really essential. We heard the important role that states and governments can play not only at the national level but also at regional and local level, and the role that sports organisations at national level through their different levels of sport can play when they work together and work with local partners on the ground, civil society organisations, to embed safeguarding measures and procedures within their programme. So it really is about working collectively and working together. It's something that we're trying to do at the global level, where we're different bodies that are sitting here. There was a recent very helpful webinar that was run by the IOC recently with international federations, where we were sharing information, learning from each other, sharing the challenges, what works, what doesn't, lessons learned. And I think that info sharing at the global level is also something that needs to happen at the national level by partners working together, because it's not just one sector or stakeholder group that's going to keep kids safe. It's everybody working together through collective action. And this is also a key message that we're giving to our national associations.
Bueno, gracias.
Thank you. Please allow me to begin by referring to what tangible plan of action we should develop and how we should reach out to children and protecting the inner circle. Well, I have to say that in the Ibero-American context, we have drawn a number of conclusions and a plan of action which governments must take into consideration. At the next assembly on the 26th, which the Ibero-American Summit will be holding in Ecuador, we hope that these conclusions will be formally adopted and taken on board by all governments. Along the same lines, we'd like to extend an invitation to the Centre for Human Rights and Sport to deliver a presentation and promote the adoption of the conclusions at that forum. On a domestic level in Spain, we've started to make decisive steps and formulate a framework for protecting children's rights in sport around 2 or 3 years ago. We know that we still have plenty to do because this is a long path we're following. As has been said by others in this conference, we have a huge panoply of stakeholders. From government, we believe that awareness raising is particularly important. And another crucial issue is training. Now, when it comes to awareness raising, we're not going to claim ownership of developments in that field, but I think that others on the panel will know that when we launched a campaign 2 years ago in Madrid, there were some top-ranking sporting organisations said that this doesn't concern me, this doesn't happen in my sport, in my club. I'm not going to name them, but I think we've overcome this now. It can happen, it does happen. So I think that this has been a qualitative leap forward. On a more practical level, it's true that we are developing these materials that I mentioned a few moments ago to you, and this European project, as well as this protocol concerning harassment in conjunction with Spanish authorities. And I didn't want to leave this forum without flagging the following. It's like the Tutok campaign. Young people don't know where to turn to, who to turn to, who they can report harassment and abuse to, how they can do it. So this is why we've been working with the ANAR Foundation. It's an NGO that's been around for 49 years, and it's been working for 49 years with a 24-hour hotline, what we call the red phone, and it received around 43,000 phone calls from children last year. So we're on the right track, but a lot to do. Thank you.
No child left behind.
Thank you, Najat. Now, I think we have now reached the end of our discussion, which could go on actually for a long time. But let me just say that I'm extremely grateful for all of you having been present here today and to listen to the, not only to my initial statement and the recommendations, but especially the reaction by all those whose daily work is really is about really trying and succeeding to a large extent implementing these recommendations with the best interest of the child being at the forefront of their concerns. And I'm really, really very impressed by what I've heard. As to the questions from the audience, I think the answer in relation to indigenous children, children belonging to the LGBTI community? I think the answer is very straightforward. What the Convention requires and what my report implicitly requires, because I rely very much on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, is that there is no discrimination on whatever ground. So whatever safeguards and whatever measures are being put in place, they should apply to all children. The other thing I wanted to say, and I'm really, I'm picking up a little bit of what David said in his statement, is that this should not be about risk management. And I think this is really very much to the point. When we're talking about children's rights, this should be something which is there by design. Children's rights by design should also apply to every policy which states, sports federations are putting into place. Children's rights and the protection of children should not be an afterthought and being addressed in a crisis, in an emergency solution. So let's think about all these things in advance. Let's think about what remedies should be in place. How accessible are they? What are the measures we put in place to when victims of sexual abuse or of sale are there to help them, to support them, and to allow them to recover, to reintegrate, and to acquire their full status as a human being, to which obviously every single human being is entitled. So I don't want to repeat any more of my recommendations. I just hope that this opportunity we had today and the forum of these 2 days will have enhanced the awareness and the willingness of all the actors concerned, all the stakeholders, starting with governments, with sport federations, but civil society as well, and the children feeling encouraged that their voice is being heard. I hope it will produce its effect, and I'm absolutely grateful for especially Mary and her team, and Dorothy for having made this conversation possible, and Najat for being here today with us, and all the panelists who, as I said in the beginning, are spending a lot of energy and time, and with success, to the implementation of my recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to David, because I think I just want, many things were told, and regarding child safety by design, this is very important. It's not only about risk management. We were discussing also about the fact that we need really to embed all this action within more wide child protection system, and to avoid all these parallel systems. This is important. We're discussing about raising awareness, training capacities, political commitment really translated in budget, in resources and means. And my question also is about also monitoring and accountability mechanisms. I think it's really very important to not forget it, because we need to have, and my question will be how we can, and maybe David, how we can really move on what this big momentum to make it more duly implemented, more widely adopted by many, many sports organizations. This is one point. How we can use this recommendation of the Special Rapporteur as a frame, really work to see what is implemented. And maybe regarding monitoring is a kind of question to the Sport Chance Forum. It could be really the follow-up and monitoring of the implementation of the recommendation could be used in maybe the next report. The floor is to you.
Thank you. Before I start on your question, I wanted to recognize also from the Honorable Delegate that provided the intervention regarding indigenous peoples. The Commonwealth Games Federation, I've got 1 minute. Okay, I'll be very, very quick. The Commonwealth Games Federation has committed to developing a declaration on the rights of indigenous people through sport as part of our Truth and Reconciliation plans. This includes respect, protect, promote, and empower people if we're running an event or running program. And that's something we've committed to have in place, along with addressing the legacy of slavery, as well as the legacies of religious sectarianism, which all have combined work around truth and reconciliation programs. So I would really like to speak with you after. With regard to how we actually get this out on the ground more frequently, and I would say not more frequently, but more effectively, we have to recognize that it is not just a government's responsibility, it's not just a sport federation's responsibility, it's not an NGO's responsibility, it is a combined effort. And the problem is the structures of hierarchy that we've typically worked in don't work in this space. It has to be a joined-up approach. You need frameworks, and you need a commitment, a pledge by everybody to uphold and ensure the implementation. Plenty of people have ratified the Convention for Rights of the Children. Very few are implementing it. It's not good enough just to say you're going to do it. You actually have to do it. And so I think, we could start here today by all of us as individuals. You don't have to represent your institution, but as individuals pledging to uphold and promote the implementation of the Convention on Rights of the Child, and at the very, very front end, ensure in everything we do the protection, respect and protection of children in our planning and implementation of sport. And I think if we can do that, it starts here. But it has to be multi-sector, and it has to be, in many cases, multi-purpose. But we need to make a pledge, and I think we have a great opportunity to do that today if we wanted to. It's really up to us.
I have to, many thanks. I think I have to close the session. We arrive at time, it's 10:30, no? Just before I close the session, I want to jump on what David Ward was telling. And really we need to pledge and to renew our commitment and to translate it in concrete action, not only in slogan, and to use the SDG framework. I just remind you that by 2030, we make a promise, and we need to keep it, is to make sure that by 2030, children are going to live in peaceful, inclusive, just societies free from violence. And it's tomorrow. And really, very frankly, we need to act better and faster because we are still far. Another point, I think, I want to remind that we need maybe to mobilize and to involve more and more children in informing, in designing, in implementing and in monitoring, because they are actors also of positive change and actors of protection. And I just really commit myself also as a special representative on violence against children. I can tell you, and I commit, that my mandate will support and will continue on advocating and supporting all of you in really implementing and fighting these forms of violence and preventing, and to make sure that no child is left behind. Many thanks to all of you.